Let me introduce the presentation of our paper, Simulation of the Impact of Eco-Expenditure on the Effectiveness of Eco-Projects, the Railways of Ukraine Case. Authors: Nestor Shpak, Liana Maznyk, Zoriana Dvulit, Oksana Mykytiuk, Tatiana Melnyk. The novelty of the article is the development of methodological approaches to test the hypothesis that which increasing environmental expenditure for environmental protection, carbon dioxide emissions from rolling stock and stationary sources of pollution of the 6 railways of Ukraine are reduced. Slide 3. Research methodology. A multi-level hierarchical model is proposed, which at the first level estimates the relationship between operational turnover and the amount of carbon dioxide emissions by the relevant sources of pollution in terms of their volume and structure. The second level of simulation focuses on the structure and closeness of the relationship between environmental expenditure and the amount of carbon dioxide emissions as the most harmful pollutant. At the third level, the share of variation in emissions due to transportation is compared with the share of variation in emissions due to the cost of environmental projects. The hierarchy of the model also provides for the structuring of the object of study. The first level of the hierarchy, 6 railways of joint stock company Ukrzaliznytsia. The second level, joint stock company Ukrzaliznytsia. The system of selected indicators provided for the inclusion of relevant statistical reports submitted to state statistic bodies and internal statistical reporting of the railways of Ukraine for 2007 to 2019. Slide 4. The application of the proposed hierarchical modeling involves conducting a priori analysis of the dynamics of volume and quality indicators of 6 railways of Ukraine and joint stock company Ukrzaliznytsia in general. The downward trend was observed in 2019. 2019 was a difficult year in terms of both the results of transportation work and environmental protection activities. In the context of Ukraine's international obligations, including joint stock company Ukrzaliznytsia, such dynamics is unacceptable and makes it difficult to meet the relevant requirements. Slide 4. 5. The dynamics of the structure of the total operational turnover of the Ukrainian railways in 2007 to 2019 was characterized by significant fluctuations. Thus, the share of Одеська, Південно-Західна Railway and Lvivska railways increased rapidly in 2015 to 2019, with slight fluctuations over the year. In 2013 to 2019, the share of Donetska Railway decreased sharply. The share of Pridniprovska Railway is quite unstable. The largest decline occurred in 2015, with a gradual slow growth until 2019. The general trend for joint stock company Ukrzaliznytsia is decline of the total operational turnover. Forecasting the dynamics of the studied indicator is recommended using a linear trend. The existing trends for individual railways presented in the graph are mainly declining by various forms of dependence. Slide 6 to 7. The largest polluter was the Odessa Railway in 2017. More than 21% of all emissions from the railways of Ukraine. The smallest, the Pridniprovska one, more than 11% in 2014. The total change in emissions from the railways decreased by almost 42%, which is significantly ahead reduction of traffic volumes, which decreased in 2019 compared to 2007 by less than 36%. Slide 8 to 9. In the studied period, the structure of environmental protection expenditure for the railways of Ukraine is characterized by significant changes. The lowest share of total expenditure in 2009, more than 2%, falls on the Pivdena Railway, which, however, in 2011 became the leader in this indicator, more than 50%. Significant fluctuations of the respective shares are also characteristic of the Odessa Railway, from almost 5% in 2012 to almost 38% in 2009. The dynamics of environmental protection expenditure is absolute terms in also unstable. More than a fourfold increase in this indicator was observed in 2012 compared to 2007, and a decrease of almost 15% in 2015. Later, this indicator began to increase gradually to 11% in 2019 compared to 2007. Slide 10 to 11. The results of the correlation regression analysis of the dependence of emissions by Ukrainian railways of the dynamics of operational turnover, the first level of the model hierarchy after a priori analysis, showed a direct relationship between these indicators. The adequacy of the applied models is confirmed by the relevant statistical criteria. The probability is 0.95. As a result of the study of the dependence of growth rates, decrease of emissions of the railways of Ukraine, it was found that it exists for all railways except the Pivdena Railway and Pridniprovska Railway, second level of the hierarchical model. This dependence can also be traced for joint stock company Ukrzaliznytsia as a whole. Slide 12-13. The calculation results confirm that environmental protection projects do contribute to reducing carbon dioxide emissions. However, it is necessary to study why these calculations are not valid for the Pivdena Railway, because for some time it was the leader in the share of environmental expenditure. It was practically implemented the proposed hierarchical model of dependence between, first, operational turnover and the amount of carbon dioxide emissions by the relevant sources of pollution in terms of their volume and structure, the first level of the hierarchy. Second, environmental expenditure and the amount of carbon dioxide emissions, the second level of the hierarchy. In the future, the developed model can be applied to identify problematic objects in railway transport for which the magnitude of share of environmental expenditure in total doesn't affect the reduction of carbon dioxide emissions. The proposed model allows to assess the indirect effectiveness of environmental projects of railways with the separation of objects that demonstrate the lack of relationship between the size of environmental expenditure and carbon dioxide emissions. It was found that Pivdenna and Pridniprovska railways during the study period were not the largest consumers of diesel fuel. So this fact cannot explain the lack of relationship between environmental expenditure and carbon dioxide emissions. Such a conclusion may be an indirect evidence of inefficient distribution and formation of environmental expenditure of Ukrainian railways. Subsequent studies of these railways may reveal the nature of the reasons for the lack of such a connection. The approbation of the model for other branches in the national economy seems promising. Thank you for your attention.